Hey everyone, it's Allie, and it's only been a day, well, 2 days for you since you'll see it the next day, and we've already made this build even better. After the game got broken wide open through the die bomb changes to this build, I really didn't think there was any way to make this build any better. Well, we ended up actually finding a way to make this build better, giving you somewhere around an additional 30 to 40% DPS, depending on how long getting some of these items is going to take you. Today, we're going to be talking about how to fit in a new relic, Gambit of an Erased Rogue, and finally how we're going to be swapping over from melee critical strike chance over to Shadow Hunter, which is going to give us 10% bow critical strike chance, making us now scale off of bow critical strike chance instead. The biggest upgrade here is going to be the swap over to bow critical strike chance, allow us to get an additional prefix on our weapon, and it's going to be worth somewhere around a 20 to 30% DPS increase once you do get yourself a new dagger with a new prefix. Now, as always, all these changes will be reflected in the build guide, and the build planner for this build will also be changed as well. You can find the links to everything in the description below, and I highly encourage you to look at the written guide, as more information will also be provided there if you want a written format of everything we have to talk about in this video. Now, before we do go any further, I do want to go over some housekeeping with some of the other things that we should mention for this build. So today we have 4 things to talk about, and the first one that I want to cover is something that a few people have been struggling with, and that is going to be dancing shadows. Now, for some people, this has been broken, and for everyone, it's actually broken currently, but for some people, for some reason, dancing shadows is making your die bomb just not do damage. This isn't the only case of this. For some other people, some other nodes are causing the same issue. But the biggest thing we've been able to learn about this bug is specifically that for just some accounts, for some reason, if you were to pick Dancing Shadows, your damage becomes 0. You just cannot do damage with Die Bomb. If you are one of the people that this is currently happening for, I would recommend to just remove Dancing Shadows and Flock of Crows, and instead just opt to put more points into Rushing Wings and Devastating Dive. If these are filled up, you can always then consider maybe picking up Talon Blades, which is going to give you a bit of crit multi, give you more damage, or potentially just picking up Rush of Hunt to get a little bit more CDR. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about here is that Dancing Shadows is also just broken for everyone. Currently, this node doesn't actually do anything, and the same goes for Flock of Crows. They both just straight up do not do what they're supposed to do. Because of this, most people actually want to drop these points as well. Now, the reason I haven't dropped them is because there's another interesting bug with this. For some reason, for some accounts, mine included, if you have Dancing Shadows equipped, for some reason, the Shrouded in Darkness and the Smoke Blade stacks just scale faster. I cannot explain this to you. I cannot tell you why this is happening, but in some cases you want Dancing Shadows because it's making your Spoke Bomb better. And some of the cases you don't want Dancing Shadows because it's only reducing your damage, or it's just straight up doing nothing, as the Shadow Falcons just simply do not take off again for a second hit. Die Bomb's a very bug skill. It's all over the place. It's a mess. And every day we just find out new things about it. And well, I would recommend to see for yourself if your Shadow Falcons are giving you additional stacks in Smoke Bomb faster. But if they're not, I would just recommend to drop it. And if you've been having issues with Die Bomb doing no damage, well, this is your answer of why that's happening. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is something that a lot of people have been bringing up to me, and I just want to quickly talk about it just so everyone's on the same page. I've had a lot of people ask me, why aren't we using the Die Bomb bow, Talon of Valor, and why aren't we dual wielding? I want to very quickly discuss both those things and why those aren't correct in this build, or at least not optimal to do, and just to very quickly be able to reference people to this video in the future. So first off, why aren't we dual wielding? As you might know, some other popular versions of this guide are currently telling people to dual wield, and I've been telling people the complete opposite, that you should never actually dual wield in this build. The reason for that being is that dual wielding doesn't actually give you that much extra damage. It's giving you somewhere around 20 to 30% extra DPS, and realistically, in my opinion, that is completely worthless, especially due to just the amount of damage that we actually do. Pushing high monoliths, and in general, for most people, I would say, tankiness is the single most important thing. And that goes for pretty much every single build in Last Epoch. Tankiness is going to be the most important stat over your damage. As long as you have enough damage, and as long as you're killing things at a relatively fast pace, there really isn't a reason to stack more damage. That is especially true for this build when currently with a dagger and a shield, I am killing bosses in about 10 seconds flat. If I were to equip 2 daggers, then I would instead be killing bosses in maybe 6 to 7 seconds, and that realistically isn't really saving me much time. It's also especially notable when we look at how much adding a Cradle of the Erase is actually doing for us in our build. Cradle is currently giving us about 50% of our glancing blow, which is making it so we always have a consistent 35% less damage. What we can instead do is just not run a Cradle, and that means we are only at about 50% glancing blow, with us basically having no good way to actually hit 100% without us possibly doing something like taking the Blade Dancer node Apostasy, which is going to remove all of our dodge chance and give us glancing blow chance. But realistically, we don't have that much dodge chance, and that would just overall make us weaker, because then we're just losing our dodge chance in favor of getting glancing blows. Because of all this, you go from having a consistent 35% damage reduction to just a sometimes active damage reduction, which really isn't that good if you are against big hits. If a hit brought you to, let's say, maybe 10% health from full health, that means if you didn't have a glancing blow on that hit, it would have just straight up killed you. And if you have a 50% chance with daggers, especially when the dagger is also just making could take 9% more damage for dual wielding, that is going to be substantially worse. And again, due to just the amount of damage we do, that is just not going to be something that's viable. And this is also true specifically for bows. That's a problem with Talon of Valor as well. Talon of Valor is a very strong bow, but we just lose our shield and we lose our glancing blow chance. And with Arrow Guard being nerfed to where it's not at least a 50% glancing blow roll, we just unfortunately can't realistically make it work without just us losing way too much EHP. Now, with that all the way, why don't we start talking about some of the things that we've added to this build to just make it absolutely silly. So the first thing to mention is going to be the new bow tech. Now, I want to paint a picture for you cuties. We are a minion build where our minion, our Falcon, is doing all the work. That is equipping a dagger, and we are now going to be scaling bow critical strike chance. Yes, you heard me right. We are now going to be scaling bow critical strike chance instead of melee critical strike chance. So the reason behind this is Shadow Hunter. Shadow Hunter gives you 10% raw base crits to your bow attacks if you are standing within your smoke bomb. Now, obviously, this is not going to do anything for you while you're running around in Echoes, as you're never going to be standing inside of it. That doesn't matter because Aerial Assault and Umbra Blades was already doing all the clearing for you, and we never relied on Die Bomb for any clearing. What we're doing here, the reason we're picking this is because this is going to allow us to get substantially more crit chance for our Die Bomb. Unfortunately, I did not know about the crit vulnerability changes that was made in 9.0 that changed the way the scaling worked. Before, crit vulnerability gave you 20% raw flat crit that was then increased by all of your critical strike chances. That has since been changed, meaning that the 20% increased raw crit is not increased by any sort of increased critical strike chance. It's just only added in at the end of the whole equation. And because of that, we now need substantially more critical strike chance to actually crit cap Die Bomb. Because of this, we are going to be swapping over to Shadow Hunter, not only because it's just more efficient and we only need to have high critical strike chance and high damage on Die Bomb when we are specifically fighting bosses, which is very easy to do. But at the same time, it's going to give us a substantially better critical strike chance that we can get with our dagger, while at the same time giving us more damage. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be how Go for the Eyes actually works. Go for the Eyes looks at the highest of the three between melee crit, throwing crit, and bow crit, and then takes whichever of the three is the highest and gives 75% of it over to your Falcon. I drew a very quick paint picture to explain this to you, as some people have had a much easier time understanding this with a visual representation. So these are the representations of my critical strike chances. For example, let's say this is 20% total melee critical strike chance, this is 40% bow critical strike chance, and this is, for example, 5 throwing critical strike chance. In this scenario, our melee critical strike chance and our throwing critical strike chance would be completely thrown away by Go for the Eyes. Because our bow critical strike chance is the biggest one, our Falcon is going to be taking 75% of that. That means all melee critical strike chance we have would be completely wasted. What this means is we only want to focus on one very specific critical strike chance and buff that as much as we can to get our Falcon to steal all of it. And that is specifically where Shadow Hunter comes in play. So in our build, we have no critical strike chance at all, other than some generic critical strike chance we've been starting to stack on our gear due to Die Bomb needing critical strike chance. And what I've been telling people to do for the past few days is to specifically get yourself a dagger that has a critical strike chance implicit and to roll melee critical strike chance as an implicit. In this case, this dagger currently has 9% melee critical strike chance. And given that all of our other critical strike chances are at 5% by default, that means because we have 9% extra melee, that our Falcon is going to be looking at our melee critical strike chance. The other thing to mention here is that, for example, something like a generic critical strike chance on these gloves is going to apply to all of our critical strike chance at the same time. If you go back to the paint picture, that means that the gloves would be benefiting the melee, the bow, and the throwing critical strike chance at the same rate. Well, as you can see, we're currently wasting a prefix on this dagger because we're trying to get more critical strike chance. And what we can do instead is, well, just not bother. Instead, then go get the free 10% critical strike chance on Smoke Bomb, because these points that we put here were just wasted over here with the Armor Shred. As if you really think about it, if we get a Armor Shred roll on a dagger, for example, this one has 170%, I can very easily hold 100 Armor Shred stacks with this. And if you consider just how many Armor Shred stacks that Eroding Fume is actually giving me, this was just worth maybe around 10 or so Armor Shred stacks. And when we have 100 of them, that really isn't that valuable. So we just get rid of these points and just put those points into Shadow Hunter for free. What that then allows us to do is to make a dagger that looks something like this. Because we don't care about critical strike chance, we can instead just go for a Chris, which I know are very rare, or an Obsidian Dagger as your next best bet, which has increased physical damage on it. And then instead of wasting our prefix slots on something like flat melee critical strike chance, we can then just put either critical strike multiplier, generic critical strike chance, which we can get a lot of, or other useful stats such as percent physical damage. This allows us to make a substantially stronger weapon where we are gaining more critical strike chance than we had before, and we get an additional prefix, which allows us just overall have more damage. Because of this, our damage is going to be substantially higher, and in my case of swapping from this dagger with 9% total critical strike chance to the Smoke Bomb setup with this dagger and the 140% increased critical strike chance on it, I end up going from around 20% critical strike chance at all times to, if I were to press Smoke Bomb, going from 32% bow critical strike chance all the way up to 68%. This is going to give our Falcon substantially more critical strike chance, and it's going to be very easy to be able to scale this even higher. Now, the next little bit of tech that I want to talk about is going to be adding another Weaver item into our build. In this case, we are going to be interested in Gambit of an Erased Rogue. This is a Weaver Relic that is going to work exactly the same how your Cradle has been working before, where it's going to have Weaver's Will, and it's going to be upgrading itself very slowly over time. And well, we just realized that there are no good relics, period. None of the bases for relics were any good. And because it's a Weaver item and because you can just get a bunch of decent stats on it, we can just do the same thing that we've been doing for our Cradle of the Erased, where we just keep getting a bunch of these and then simply just rolling them until they roll something decent, and then just using it on top of all the other benefits. Now for Cradle specifically, we used it because we needed the Golden Age stacks to actually hit 100% glancing blow chance, but the Cadence of Gambit, we're just using it because the stats on it are more useful than any other unique relic, and at the same time, the Weaver rolls can be pretty good just because relics are pretty flexible in terms of what we can roll for. Now, the way you're going to farm this is going to be the same way you've been farming your Cradles. You can use Runes of Ascendance on relics to hope to get yourself a Gambit and then roll it from there by just equipping it. You can use Prophecies to attempt to get yourself a bunch of relics this way. And finally, you can specifically go to Last Ruin and farm Last Ruin, as this is where you can find the drops a guaranteed set or unique relic roll very often. Gambit of the Erased is going to be a very fluid item in terms of what you can get on it. There are going to be quite a lot of good rolls, and there really isn't something very specific you want on it like you do for Cradle with the all-res roll. Instead on Gambit, we just have a lot of very strong rolls. Some things you might want to be on the lookout for would be things such as increased physical damage, added throwing damage, critical strike chance, critical strike multiplier, health, any serve resistances you might need, and potentially looking for additional levels of air assault, as that is the only useful additional levels of any of the potential prefixes. Now, that is not the only benefit of Gambit, as obviously it's going to do something other than just be a Weaver's item. So the first thing to mention here is that it's going to have +1 to rogue skills. This means that all of our abilities get an additional point. Now, in the case of most of these abilities, it's kind of useless, but the points that we really care about here is obviously going to be the additional level to Die Bomb, allowing us to pick up additional points, and specifically the additional level to Falconer, which is going to allow us to pick up another point here, giving us even more damage. The build planner will be updated with the additional levels in mind. It's going to show you exactly where you'd want to put these extra points once you do get yourself a Gambit. The other thing to mention here is it's going to give us a little bit of flat dodge, which is great. We always want more dodge. And finally, it's going to give us a 1 in 6 chance to take a certain amount less damage per active shadow we have. Well, because we can always have 3 active shadows at all times due to us consistently dropping smoke bombs all over the place, even if we're not on the same screen as them, that means if you were to potentially get yourself a max rolled Gambit, that you would have a 1 in 6 chance to take 75% less damage from the next hit against you. This is just another added defensive layer that's not going to necessarily be super consistent, but whenever it procs, it's going to help you out, just overall making you feel even tankier. Gambit's a great option, and I really do think that everyone should immediately go and try to get yourself one, but I wouldn't prioritize it over something like Cradle simply because it's a kind of nice to have item that isn't doing something mandatory for the build that Cradle is with the chance to glancing blow. So this is something that you can put on the back burner and get yourself later as a very nice upgrade. With all that said, cuties, that is everything that we have for today's update on Shadow Dagger's Falconer. And while these are not game-breaking changes, these are going to massively boost your damage. Not only that, but Gambit is going to give you somewhere around a 5 to 6% DPS boost as well, which is going to feel pretty nice. And the tech of us swapping over to bow critical strike chance instead is going to give us an additional prefix on our weapon, which as soon as you do actually finish crafting your weapon is going to be somewhere around a 15 to 20% DPS increase. If you have any questions on any of these changes, cuties, feel free to leave a comment in the description below, and I'll be more than happy to help you as soon as I can. I also stream on Twitch every single day, and you're more than free to come over on Twitch and ask me any questions there, or if you just simply want to come and join us for any theory crafting or just hang out with all the cuties and be a part of our community, I'd be more than happy to see you there as well. With all that said, cuties, I hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll see you all in the next video.